Hello and welcome to GearHeads. My name's Jesse and today we're working on my wife's 2007 Ford Mustang GT. So this thing's got about 135,000 miles on it. It needs all kinds of refresh work on the suspension, and today I'm doing a whole bunch of stuff, but this video specifically I'm going to be showing you guys how to replace the inner and outer tie rod ends. So, there's a lot of options out there. You can kind of buy whatever you want. Personally, I'm going to be using the Napa chassis line for these. Even Napa, they have multiple different product lines there. I've had great luck with the Napa chassis line. I use it on customers' cars all the time, and it seems to be good quality. So, in any case, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so obviously most of you guys are probably going to be doing this without a lift. That is totally okay. This job is completely doable on the ground. Just make sure you jack the car up safely on jack stands before you start any work. And also, if you're doing it on the ground and you don't have access to power tools like I'm going to be using, then make sure you do yourself a favor and break your lugs loose. You don't need to take, obviously don't take your wheels off. Just break them all a little bit loose before you lift the car up the ground. Otherwise you're going to have a lot of fun trying to, break it loose while the wheel's sitting here spinning. So anyway, go ahead and take your wheels and tires off and we'll move to the next step. So we're going to start by taking the outer tie rod end off. So I always leave the key in the ignition, not in the on position. But if you turn your key forward and then off, it should leave your steering wheel unlocked. And that's nice because then you can move it with your hands like this. Now you're going to need a 17mm to take this off right here. So now to get this tie rod end out, there's a few different methods you can use. You can get a pickle fork and bash it in between here, and that can help separate it. There's also different presses and pullers and stuff that you can buy. I'll make sure I leave some links in the description to different tools that might be helpful for you, because if this method doesn't work, you might need something like that. But for me, at least, being in California with not as bad a rust, most of the time all you've got to do is hit the knuckle right here with a sledgehammer. It might take several hits. But usually you can break them loose that way, so let's go ahead and try it and see if it works. Let's see. There we go. So that one was not too bad and it came out pretty easily. Like I said, if that doesn't work though, you might need a pickle fork to jam in here to separate them, or use a presser or puller. Alright, let's move on to the inner tie rod end. One piece of advice before you take the tie rod all the way out, if you don't have a vise or something at home, you're going to want to take this jam nut loose before you take this out because it'll keep it from twisting. So take a 21mm and go ahead and break this loose. There we go. So that should be loose now, and you should be able to mess with it later. You can always use some penetrating oil or something like that to help you if you need to. And now I can go ahead and just take this the rest of the way out. Like I said though, usually I do this on a vise, so I don't need to worry about that, and I just take this whole thing out as an assembly. But anyways, let's get to the inner tie rod end now. So next we're going to want to take this boot off. So there should be a small clamp at the end here. Just use a pair of pliers, slip that off and let it slide down here, and then we're going to take this inner clamp off. I'll show you how to do that. So these clamps are non-reusable. You can see there's a little crimp spot up here. That might be in a different spot of rotation on here, but they should all have a crimp like that. You can either take a pair of pliers, pinch and grab it real hard and twist it, or you can take a flathead screwdriver, shove it inside the crimp, and then twist a little bit. Let's see here. Twist and pry at it, and it should pop open. So I just need to kind of spread it a bit. There we go. I'm making progress now. Alright, and then once you have that part done, just pry it like that, and then this clamp should come right off. So on a Mustang, luckily, these are very accessible and easy to get to. You can use a pipe wrench on this. You can use an appropriately sized wrench, which I don't remember off the top of my head what size it is. I believe it's metric though. Or you can also still use one of these universal inner tie rod end pullers. I'll make sure I leave a link to this in the description in case you're curious, to buy one of these instead of doing it the way I'm doing it. But I actually am just going to use a big pair of channel locks, and it should come loose. So we're going to want to just grab it right here on the hex portion and then twist it off. There we go. Righty tighty, lefty loosey. And then just spin here and the whole thing should come right out. If this is super worn out, then of course you can always just grab it up here and pull it out, but that's it. That's how we get it out. Now let's go over to the bench and we'll assemble all the new parts. So if you already broke your jam nut loose on the car like I showed you, you shouldn't need a vise for this, but now you're gonna spin your tie rod off. Now this part's somewhat important. You wanna count how many turns you make. So here we go. We got 1 turn, 2 turns, 3 turns, 19, 20, 21, and that was it. Okay, so we got 21 turns to take this guy off. Now we gotta take this jam nut off. Let me grab my 21mm wrench. This guy was slightly rusted to the inner tie rod, but should come loose without too much fuss. Then hopefully I can just spin it off with my fingers after I get past the rust here. There we go. So obviously we're replacing the inner tie rod end. If you were just to replace the outers on your car because that's all that had play, you could just do this all on the car. But we're saving the boots here so we can reuse them on the new inner tie rod end, so that's why we need to take the jam nut and tie rod end off. There you go. Now these inner tie rod ends come with a little bit of grease and they want you to push it into the joint here. You can see it already does come with grease pressed into it, but they give you this extra, and then you might want to put a little bit along here where the boot's going to ride so that it's easier to slide on and off. So I'm just going to open this, get some grease in here, get some grease on here. We're going to slide the boot on and then put it back here and install the new tie rod end on it. Alright, now slide the boot back onto this guy. And for now I'm just going to push it most of the way back. And then make sure you don't forget to slide your clamp onto place. And now put the jam rod or the jam nut in and just run it most of the way back. You don't necessarily need to count this one. So here's the outer tie rod we're going to be putting on. It's one of the Napa chassis ones. This has a greasable Zerk fitting that comes with it. That's in the little baggie that comes in the bag, and it also comes with an extra jam nut. Obviously we're not going to need it because we already have one on the inner, but you know, it never hurts to keep it around. So now we're going to go ahead and put this back on. We're going to count threads, 21 turns, just like we did when we took it off. Now, just worth noting, this is not an exact science. Once you're done with this, you need to go get an alignment done, but this should put it back on close enough for you to at least safely make it to the alignment shop, and then they can fine tune it and get it, you know, the rest of the way there. So 21 turns again. Let's see. 2, 3, 4, 20, and 21. So let's go ahead and run that jam nut up. All right, and you don't need to like go super Hulk on it and tighten this down like crazy, but make sure you at least snug it up pretty good. Oh, of course, the new one's a 22mm, the old one was a 21. All right, now we're ready to go ahead and take this thing out, pull your boot all the way forward, and we can go install this in the car. All right, so before we go put this in the car, I'm gonna go ahead and install the Zerk fitting on the back of the outer tie rod end. So put it in with your fingers, and then it should be an 8mm, at least most of them are, and then just snug it up. All right, so that should be good, and then after everything's installed in the car, I can put a grease gun on this and fill it up the rest of the way with grease, but we'll get to that later. Now we're ready to go put this back in the car. So on this model of Mustang, before we put this in, there's one more thing you might want to do. If you have the proper inner tie rod tool and you can torque this thing down to an exact torque specification, then you know you may want to just do that. However, I like to put blue Loctite on these. These inner tie rods actually came with blue Loctite for this purpose. But a lot of steering racks have a locking pin that goes through, or they might have a flat washer that sits on here and it has ears on it that crush down, and they keep the inner tie rod from being able to spin itself off over time. This does not have that. They're just torque to spec and leave them, but it's never a bad idea. Put a little bit of blue Loctite on the end and then thread this guy on so you don't have to worry about it potentially rattling loose later. And also, by the way, this is just your steering spacer. Those can actually be pulled off and removed and swapped out for different size ones if you were to add different size tires. It's to keep your wheel from turning too far so your tires don't rub inside here on any other of the suspension components or the body or anything. I'm not messing with it. I'm leaving the stock ones in, but just so you know, that's what that piece is. And all this oil that you see in here is actually just basically melted down grease from the old tie rod end. This is not leaking steering rack, luckily, but when you take these off, if this thing's full of oil or it's super full oil in here, your steering rack's probably leaking and you might want to think about replacing it. Oh, all right, I actually pushed the steering rack in a little bit to give myself more room because the outer tie rod end is hitting on stuff while I'm trying to take it out, or trying to put it in. There we go, now I can actually start spinning it into place. All right. I'm gonna make sure you tighten this thing down all the way. There we go. All right, now go ahead and slide your boot up and pop it back on here. And now this part of it, and then this guy obviously slides back here. You put your clamp over. Now if you really want to, you can go buy the same style of clamps. You can probably find them online. You can find the special tool for them. But to be honest, this thing does not see much force on it pushing and pulling. If you use a good set of quality zip ties that don't dry out and crack after a year, you can use just a zip tie here and it'll hold it on just fine. Give it a yank. See, that ain't coming off. And don't forget your small clamp on the bottom side of it. Oh, come on. And now you are ready to go ahead and install your outer tie rod end. So just slip it up into place and go ahead and put your nut on. Some of these might come with a castle nut washer where you put a cotter pin through it to secure it. This one actually just comes with a locking nut. But in either case, go ahead and tighten that guy down. And once you're done with that, if all you're doing is your inner and outer tie rod ends, then you're done. But I am going to be moving on to other stuff in this car. So there you go, that's how you do tie rod ends. And once again, before you go drive it, just make sure these jam nuts are at least snugged up tight. All right, so when you go to do the other side, it's literally the exact same thing. Just keep in mind, you can always move the steering rack a little bit left and right to make it easier to get to those inner tie rod ends. And once you're done with this job, you have to go get an alignment. Don't keep driving it around. You're gonna, first off, it might not be safe to drive if the alignment's that far off. Secondly, you're gonna kill your tires. So make sure you book an alignment and go straight from this job to an alignment shop, and then you'll be good to drive again. Now I'm gonna go ahead and start moving on to all the other suspension stuff on this car that we're working on. But I hope you guys found the video helpful. If you have any questions, please drop a comment and I will do my best to get back to you guys. So thank you, and as always, keep wrenching.